Welcome to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need. On Musitations, we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the relationship between nature, culture, and the soul. I'm Michael Maria, and I'm your host and guide on this journey on the edge of a new millennium. I bring my 30-plus years of experience as an integrative wellness guide, best-selling author, meditation, yoga, mindfulness teacher, and a 4-time Grammy-nominated musician. Join me now on this adventure of awakening the soul. Welcome to Musitations. I'm your host, Michael Maria, and I'm so thrilled to have another Soulversation. For those who've been following Musitations, a soulversation for me is when two souls encounter each other. And remember, our Musitations, one of the main themes we have is that we are music. We are music. And whenever I find someone who really lives from that same understanding and place, I get real excited. I light up inside. And I'm really, really honored to have a guest with us for this Soulversation, which is in our soul encounter in a Soulversation, is understanding the soul as a field of energy. And that whenever two people connect and share, there's actually a third field that's created. And that includes when we have a soulversation with the natural world, or with a piece of artwork, or a piece of music. And when you vibrate, when you resonate with someone who helps bring you alive. Remember, soul comes from the word anima, which means to animate. So what brings you alive is what feeds your soul and is connected to your soul. So really paying attention to that is part of what a soulversation also does. And of course, we want to encourage a soulversation with our own heart and our own soul, and befriending our soul and caring for our soul in that way. So without further ado, I have with me today McCall Erickson, the author of this beautiful book, The Second Half of the Mountain, a guide to personal alchemy after awakening. And I first heard of McCall four years ago, literally 4 years ago. So, and that was not planned. It was really awesome that, and I was, this quote that has stayed with me, that really touched my heart so deeply, was shared with me, or I shared on social media 4 years ago, and it popped up this week after McCall and I had planned to do the Soulversation together. And you just can't make this stuff up. And I'm just so tickled that I have a chance to really dive in more deeply. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She is an author, a musician, an alchemist. I found this was really interesting. I don't tell many people this, but I noticed on one of the descriptions, you had mystical realist, and that's one of the ways I think of myself as a mystical realist. I actually have mysticalrealist.com that somewhere along the line. But when I saw you were the only other person I've ever known who'd called themselves that, and I'll get into more of that. We'll see where the Soulversation's already heating up, but. Having fallen from the good graces of her religious upbringing and finding herself unable to walk any other existing paths that life had to offer, McCall Erickson learned to make her own way in a world that felt like it had no place for her. How many of us can resonate with that? I know I resonate with that deeply. Her unique voice as a writer of words and songs exploring love, beauty, mystery, and deep process. I think that's a very important phrase, deep process, which we don't get a lot of in our world today, continues to inspire many to follow the pull of their own souls. She enjoys growing her own food, exploring new places, and spending entire afternoons staring at the sky. I always say it's more important to be present than productive throughout the day, if you have to make a choice. The Second Half of the Mountain is her first book. you can find more about her at McCallErickson.com, and we'll get into other ways in which people can connect with you, McCall. But without further ado, welcome, soul friend and soul sister. It's so great to connect here. And just so folks know, we have not talked. We have been texting and emailing, but we wanted to keep this fresh, and this is a really fresh opportunity for us to have a Soulversation on Musitations. So welcome, McCall. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much. It's so good to be here and to talk with you, Soulversate with you. Yes.
Thank you. So, I know we talked about, and I want to get to your quote, but I have to say, I really realize what I'm most interested in asking you. I hope it's okay. I'm a recovering Catholic. I grew up in a pretty rigid Catholic household and upbringing, and I've been wanting to ask about this fall from the good graces of your religious upbringing. That's one thing I don't know, and if you've mentioned it or I saw it, and it's totally okay. Everything here is an invitation, not an expectation, and see where it takes us. But I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. So, what could you tell us about anything about your upbringing, religious upbringing,
Yeah.
because you do talk about in the book how scary it was and difficult it was to let go of that, and the difference, part of the difference between being religious and spiritual is a real important one for me too. But I don't know, that just all of a sudden caught my eye as I was reading this, like, oh, I meant to ask her that. So I
Yeah.
hope I
Oh,
didn't put
that's
you on the spot, but that's
no, that's good. I was raised Mormon, a very strict religion too, strict Mormon, and it was a huge part of my alchemical awakening or soul awakening to realize that there was so much I loved about the religion and so much I loved about the teachings in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. But there was a time when I realized my soul energy and my connection with that was actually outgrowing the religion. And one of the most mystical experiences of my life was sitting in church one day, and the voice coming from within said, "This is the last time you'll ever sit here. This is the last Sunday you'll ever be here." And I was like, "What?" And I got up and walked out that day and never went back. And but being raised in the culture and my family being Mormon too, it was incredibly shattering to that identity. And that's when I would say I hit my first dark night of the soul,
mm,
because I thought, well, if I don't have that framework to live with, and how am I going to orientate myself to the world and move through the world, navigate without that structure. And so that was, those are the things that put us into dark nights and make us have to feel into other ways of being. And the Mormon religion is hard to leave because it's not just um, what you do on Sunday. The religion is a culture, and it really permeates your entire life.
mm,
So I had to. It was like everything. How do I see myself in the world now? What's real to me? What do I even believe? Like all that stuff. So that really heated up my soul awakening when that happened.
thank you for that. I can identify that with that a lot as growing up Catholic. I actually, as a teenager, had a call to perhaps to the priesthood. It was a real conflict in my heart because I also knew I wanted a family, and there was a lot of other things I wanted to do. And so I think particularly what I hear in that, McCall, too, is that it was when you are a deeply spiritual person and you have a natural affinity for the larger mystery of life, spirit, that of course, if we're exposed to a religion, growing up, that is something that we will be drawn to because it's one thing in the
Yeah.
culture, at least, that does have, like, I love, even to this day, the mystery of the Catholic Mass, and there's a lot of things that I still, in fact, I still, honor a lot of that path. And I would love your thoughts on this, because one way I've thought about it is religion comes from religiare, which means to relink. So it's kind of like a bridge. And if religion's doing its job, it should be a bridge to a personal relationship to this wider, vaster
Mm,
presence that
mm,
we are the source, right, and the destination, and whatever this I know Carl Jung call extra mundane reality, this more than human reality that we're swimming in. But what happens so often is people get stuck on the bridge, or they say, my
mm,
bridge is the only bridge, or the worst thing, they forget it's a bridge, and people start thinking the bridge is the destination, and then it can actually impede spiritual growth.
mm.
So I notice, and I love the boldness you have in your book, and when I read your work, and follow your, you have a beautiful, a lot of your quotes just go right to the heart, and I this idea of falling to soul, or that most people would say fall from grace, but I almost like it's falling to grace, right? It's where it's like,
Mhm.
so I guess whatever, and also I want to, in a Soulversation, anything you're drawn to, you're curious about, we'll kind of see how that goes back and forth. But the two things, how religion can either support or take away or obstruct genuine spirituality, or what we might call soul work, something that's near and dear to us, but also how falling, is something that's something, and maybe this is a better way to phrase it. You have a wonderful description, which I don't see many people talk about in our culture, between spirit and soul, and the difference
Mm.
between them, and
Yeah.
why it is so important to understand that your spirit and soul are two different aspects of you. So anyway, I've just invited you to respond to whatever touches you and calls to you, because to me, again,
Yeah.
that is the key of a Soulversation.
Oh man, there's so much in there. Um, I love the idea of the bridge, and I almost think, as you were saying that about religion, if religion does its job, sometimes it's gonna like work itself out of a job, like put
Yes,
us into contact with
yes,
that
yes.
relationship. And I remember feeling that when I was leaving the church and leaving the religion. I thought, well, Mormons have a thing called the Holy Ghost that we get when we're baptized, which is a direct relationship with spirit. And I loved that so much because you can talk to the Holy Ghost and it guides you. It's like a spirit guide, right? And I thought when I was leaving, I thought it's ironic that this my relationship with the Holy Ghost and my relationship with spirit is the thing pulling me out of the religion.
Yes, yes.
And so it like pulled me through. And I don't think people wanted to hear that. I remember trying to talk to my bishop and my friends in the church, like, it's the Holy Ghost pulling me out of the religion. And they were just like, what? That doesn't make any sense. It's Satan who's pulling you out. But if religion does its job and you cross that bridge, you don't need the middleman. It's like having a direct experience with your own soul and having a
Mm,
direct experience with spirit. And I also said a lot, if I could have stayed in the religion, I would have, because I loved the community. I loved
mm,
the music. Mormons are all about music. I got my music, like my musician part of me was so fed by being in that religion. So there was so much about it that fed me. And if I could have stayed there, I would have. But that's also the theme of my life. There's so many situations, jobs, relationships through my whole growing up years that I'm like, if I could stay, I would. But I just kept outgrowing everything. Everything was a bridge leading me to my I say it again and again, the direct relationship with our own souls, which means we're having a direct relationship with our own life experience,
mm,
which is can be scary because you have to own it. It's a subjective experience. There's no one telling you you're doing the right thing or your experience is right, or there's no herd mentality with it. It's like, well, this is my subjective reality. which is what I love about alchemy, because it teaches us how to work with that, how to have a relationship with that and have a conversation with life and spirit and soul and all that is. Hmm.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that if religion's doing its job, it should work itself out of a job, which is
Yeah.
what, good parents are, right? Good parents are there to work themselves out of a job. I've even said, as a guide of the soul, my job is to work myself out of a job, and I know something we both feel very strongly about, that, it's been, in in astrology, they talk about the Aquarian age, which to me is more the idea that we're coming into a time when we have to all be more responsible for that relationship with our soul, and to all that is, and to this greater mystery that we're part of here. And to me, it's actually, bridging science and religion, because, part of that is finding the inner teacher, inner guru, inner shaman, inner alchemist within. And I know that's something that we both really feel is so important, for each person to take 100% responsibility for their own health, healing, and wholeness. And I feel that this is part of the good news. I have this deep connection, personal relationship to Jesus, or I like to say Yeshua, his Hebrew name. And I would say he suffered not so we didn't have to, but show us how to, like, to
Mm.
take that walk into our own desert, to go through our own crucifixion, which dark nights of the soul are, and show us how to suffer for redemption, how to suffer for rebirth, to find ourselves, the need of losing ourselves to find ourselves, which you find in all deep wisdom traditions, and kind of this, the perennial wisdom traditions. And through that process, I can say, I've really become a student of all paths. And, as a teenager, I actually, it was my parents thought I was very strange. I was like, first had to read the history of Western philosophy. Then I wanted every sacred book from all the religions. And I remember getting my Book of Mormon. They go, "Why do you want a Book of Mormon?" And I was like, because everybody's got to have part of the truth. And for me, it's very much been like many rivers, one ocean, right?
Mhm.
Or many paths, one mountain. And maybe that's, a good segue into the second half of the mountain. And I have to tell you,
Yeah.
this is kind of a funny thing. The whole time before I actually read the book, the second half of the mountain, for some reason in my mind, I kept thinking about the other half, like after getting to the top, like going back down. and that's, and I kept that's, and part of that is because my vision quest 28 years ago now, it was so hard coming back to civilization, after having this profound awakening experience, and like how to bring that experience and live that experience. And and I know there's some different ways. So I'm going to let you share with our listeners and audience a little bit about what you understand as the second half of the mountain,
Mhm.
because, well, I'll let you say it. It's not the other. It's not coming back down off the mountain, although it might be for some people. But I love the way you talk about it in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I just want to point this out, that integration journey after we reach the top, or whatever, the philosopher's stone, enlightenment, whatever, nirvana, samadhi, all those things, whatever tradition you're looking at, that's a whole other journey. And I am writing a book about that journey. I'm so excited about it. So I just have to plug that in there. But the second half of the mountain journey, like you just said, you became a student of all traditions, which is something I love about you and when I read your Ever Flowing On, you just pull all the richness from all these different places and show how, like, I love that, many rivers, one ocean, you weave it all together. It's so amazing. So I the second half of the mountain, I can frame it pretty simply, the way I see it. When you have an awakening, you come into contact with your true nature, and it can jolt you out of the way you've been walking through the world or moving through the world, right? You sense a deeper sense of yourself through your identities and ways of being. But the awakening it can be so profound because it's so strong. You come into contact with that soul self, that eternal self, enduring self. But the huge but is at that point in time, most of us still have so much conditioning and unresolved traumas, patternings, karma. And I know we don't really talk about karma in the West the way it is understood. Alchemically, karma basically just means cause and effect. Like, what are you're in a cycle, like what you're doing is causing certain energy. So how do you break out of certain karmic loops? So when we awaken to the true self and the soul self, we can't really hold on to that awakening yet. We find ourselves slipping in and out of it. We can, you might find yourself doing or saying something that doesn't feel very congruent with what that soul self is. And so you awaken, but then you start doing life and you get pulled out of it and you lose that connection because you have to work through all of those conditionings and traumas and you have to break cycles, you have to break patterns, and it takes time. So the biggest thing I would say, the second half of the mountain journey, is working through all of those conditionings, traumas, resolving the trauma, getting to a place where you can be in alignment full time. When you have a clear path to that center and a clear path of the soul self all the time, no matter what, you won't get pulled out of it. You can be anywhere, in any situation, no matter what life brings, which it brings a lot of hard challenges, and you won't get pulled away from that soul self. The reason we get pulled away is because of all the unresolved stuff. So the second journey, we can't just awaken. It's not enough to just awaken. We have to do all that work that comes with it, which the reason it's hard, I quote David White in the beginning of the book that says there's no path that goes all the way, right? And Joseph Campbell also says if there's a way or a path that someone else is, you have to make your own way. So the second half of the mountain journey, we find our own way by awakening the inner healer, tuning into our own inner navigation system. The way you get up the second half of the mountain to that enduring awakening within it's going to look different for everybody. There's no one right way to heal. There's no one right way to work through all that stuff. But it's important to remember that it can take years. It can take time. There's real processes you have to go through to get there. So there.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. I love that. I love your energy and I love your passion for this work. And it was reminding me, that this idea of literally you climb to the second half, to the halfway up the mountain.
Yeah.
And then you see there's further to go. And it reminded me of this particular quest I was guiding in the San Miguel Mountains, or I was apprenticing actually, and got to a place where the trail ran out from where we were wanting to get to, which was just above tree line. And we were kind of crazy to set a base camp at 13,000 feet, just 1,000 feet below a 14er. And it's when the trail runs out, right? It's like the taste of awakening when you access a state of consciousness, which is so important, right? I mean, you make that point too, and so much of what we try to do, what people might have as an experience in all different ways, from trauma or plant medicine or a vision quest or any kind of thing that may initiate the soul, which is kind of that first taste, right? That taste of awakening, or you access a state of consciousness. But then that path, and I love that Joseph Campbell quote, that if you're following a path, by definition, it's somebody else's, that we have to bushwhack, right? It's like that place where all of a sudden, wow, now to get to where, like, for us to get up there, we had a bushwhack. It was kind of like, we had to make our way without a set trail or path. And in this idea for me of also what I really love in your work is the grittiness of it, that you're very, you don't pull any punches, in this book about, being very clear with the reader about, you know, I know you've tasted this joy. I know you've tasted this luminous light, and it's going to get darker before it gets better. And
Yeah.
and to me, it's just like also, the seasons of the year and the night and day. And we're having this conversation actually as Hurricane Sally is off the coast. Like, she's just a few miles off the coast of where I am right now, and I've ridden 3 of these out. And I was like, well, this is appropriate because for all of us, there's always, when we're in the moment, when we're really present, the next moment has never existed before. And therefore,
Mm.
by definition, we are all bushwhacking all the time. We may create the illusion in our minds that, we're secure and safe, but actually, and I got this so much in not only, your book, but whenever we've interacted and shared, and just that this idea of honoring that when we're authentic and real and honest about life, that it is difficult, it is painful, it is dark half the time. I tell people, it's like, well, but that darkness serves a purpose,
Yeah.
and the bushwhacking serves a purpose. And that's why I've always thought of, the soul's journey and soul work as an adventure, right? It's an adventure. I love Helen Keller when she says life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And so I guess I just really want to, and that's where, they're saying, you're going to go across the bridge. It's a 3-mile bridge, when it's going to start raining, and when is this? And I said, no, this is an important soulversation I'm having. It's worth a little danger. And so I guess, that's the other thing. You're very open about your dark times in your book, and in your writing, and in your work, and in your sharing. And that to me, helps ring the truth of authenticity, because we can do good badly, I think, in the world when we overpromise the light,
Mm.
and I think there's a lot of damage that can happen to people. And of course, for me, in Musitations, we talk so much about creativity and poetry, or a piece of artwork or music. Often it's the texture and color of all the emotions, the light and the dark. I play a lot in minor keys, and so there's always, like, some people say, yeah, it's really relaxing, but sometimes I feel there could be a shark swimming in the ocean. I feel like, there's like a sadness underlying your music. And I guess I also see it, I feel that in your poetry and in your
Mm.
your writing and your work too. So that's not a question. That's my next. It's kind of like 2
Yeah.
musicians sharing a melody back and forth. So I'm open to whatever that may have touched in you.
Yeah, that touched a few things. I I think there came a point in the work and the inner healing and the second half of the mountain where I realized, oh, the dark times or the hard, gritty times, they're never going to go away. Mm. For some reason, I had that bit of conditioning, whether it came from religion or the spirituality, wherever it came from, that if you do enough work, you can finally just like overcome the darkness or whatever. But there came a time when I was like, oh no, I actually need those. I need to swim through those shark
Mm,
infested waters. I
mm,
need, like, it's part of the hero's journey. It's part
yes.
of the whole, it's where we get the richness. And I actually remembered this last night from your book that you said the poets of old say, you go to heaven for form and you go to hell for energy.
Mm,
I love that line so much
mm,
because in alchemy, we talk about traveling on the vertical axis, which is the internal axis of travel. And when we're up, we're feeling lighter in mood. we go down, though, we go down for the richness, we go down for healing, we go down for the meat of our stories. And as I realized, like, these two, this all works in sync with each other.
Mm.
There's no escaping the dark. You work with it, and it textures everything, like you said. And that was a big shift for me to realize it's not about overcoming it. It's not about overcoming the darkness. It's about working with it. And
Yes.
increasing, we've thrown these terms around, the alchemical metabolism.
Yes.
Like, the darkness isn't bad. It's feeding the whole journey. It grows us. Oh, and I'm trying to fit as much goodness as we can into the Soulversation. You use the term growing down
Mm.
instead of just growing up. We're always like, how can we achieve? How can we reach higher heights? How can we, climb the ladder? But to really grow our souls, we have to grow down like the roots of the tree. I love that so much. So it's not bad. That's why I'm so open about the darkness, and I'm so open about the realities, because I've often said one of the things that messes with us the most is thinking it should be easy. Like,
Yes.
that's the lie. That's the lie. Get rid of that. And you realize, like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I can work with that. I can work with that. So,
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. That's so key. Yeah, not only embracing, but my very first book, Horns and Halos, the subtitle is "Towards the Blessing of Darkness," and it's on love-hate relationships. It's kind of it was an extension of my dissertation, which was all qualitative research, was just all case studies. But I found it was so sad and painful that so much of the major violence, I worked with as a child protection team psychologist for years, and that so much of the worst violence was done by intimate partners, people who either parent child or siblings or partners, and how love could be turned the soil of hate. And that's what also led me a lot of Jungian understandings of the shadow. And when we don't acknowledge and honor our shadow, how it was a great book a few years back, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, I think
yeah,
is
yes,
the
I
other,
read
right?
that in high school.
Powerful book.
Yes.
And what I love, because we have this sense, and I know I've been there. I know there was a period of time, because I shared with you, my 3 dark nights of the soul, and I'm sure there's just a matter of time till another one, hits that, because it is this alchemical metabolism that I think, or one of my teachers and friends, Linda Starwolf, calls it, the shamanic spiral of change, which is kind of a very alchemical, similar approach. And that actually, the danger is whenever we assume we won't have another one, it's like, that's when we're getting ourselves into trouble. That actually, to really see that especially with what's going on the earth and where we are as a species, and all the crisis we're in culturally and with nature, and our dysfunctional relationship with nature, that in some ways, for me, our culture has been built on the denial of the darkness, on
Yeah.
the denial of the down times. We just think the economy and the stock market and everything should just up, 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 up. There's no honoring, as the indigenous people in the past would have had a ceremony of, harvesting and turning under, and the darkness, and we do not honor the darkness. I think that could be one of the, key fundamental shadows, ironically, of our culture. I mean, of our educate. Everything's going up the ladder of success, up the ladder of education. And why I was really touched by your story too, that I think we were, probably, both golden children heading for, that we had, right? We had the world at our feet. We kind of just do as you're told, cross your T's, dot your I's, and, you'll get into heaven and have a great life, and, just keep saying your prayers, and, sitting, in the pew and say, all those things, that somehow there's an assumption in all of that that it's possible to live a suffering free life,
Mhm.
when actually it's the suffering. The inconvenient truth is suffering is required not only to awaken the soul, but as you're saying, keep the soul healthy. And that a certain amount of that, we've actually become addicted to comfort. I always like to say, I never remember Jesus saying, "Blessed are the comfortable." you know, don't remember that. So I really love this honoring of the darkness, and you do it so well from the alchemical standpoint. What are some things that you could share, or you have found, that perhaps share with our listeners and audience, that, because it is still hard. I mean, even if we conceptually grasp that, okay, the darkness is part of the journey, part of the process, but we don't like, I mean, well, I should say, I think we've both gotten to the point that we probably, I mean, one of the reasons I love the Native American flute is it has this bittersweet kind of
Mm.
mournful, sorrow, joyful sorrowfulness. And that's one of the ways I stay in touch with trying to condition myself to honor the dark. What are ways that you have found for yourself and those you work with to help, I don't know if condition is the right word, or invite or welcome, because we don't want it to be gratuitously dark, right? I mean, there's
Right.
plenty of darkness without us having to purposely create more darkness, but yeah, what are some thoughts about how can we open ourselves, or maybe just prepare ourselves for the inevitable darkness that life holds?
Yeah, that's a really good inquiry. A couple things come to mind first off for me that helped a lot. And one of those is to realize how multifaceted we are. That if we can actually honor that the darkness can be happening at the same time as other things can be happening. So that it's not all consuming. Because I do want to point out that the dark nights of the soul that I went through on the second half of the mountain journey were by far the hardest, because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how important it was. I didn't have the perspective yet. So when you have the perspective that the dark nights of the soul is part of the cycle of ever unfolding and growing, once you have the perspective, it makes it a little easier. Um, and I want to I point that out because I want to say, after I reached what I would say is the philosopher's stone, where I had that abiding awakening with myself, and I could really hold my alignment no matter what, I went through one of the hardest dark nights I've ever gone through. Like, it was immediate. I mean, I it was opposite of what I thought would have happened when I acquired the philosopher's stone. It was facing one of the hardest times of my life for 4 years into this dark sludge of moving forward. And so it's like, but I want to say it still wasn't as hard as the first dark night, because I had the perspective and I had enough understanding of my multifaceted self and my multidimensional self, that it wasn't like the darkness wasn't permeating all aspects of myself. So I could honor that there was actually, I could honor other experiences happening simultaneously within the dark night. I could still connect to beauty. I could still have incredible moments of presence. I could still connect to people close to me in my life, and even though that darkness was happening simultaneously. So I think the multifaceted thing helps a lot, and realizing, having perspective, the multifaceted parts of us, that helps a lot. But also realizing it moves, it's always going to move, it's not the be all end all. And I also created a deal with my spirit team and my spirit guides, and I said, I get, oh geez, gonna knock my microphone over. I get that nothing lasts forever, and that suffering, moves. But sometimes I need some kind of like time frame. Like, can you give me like a general time frame, like 2 years? Because it's like you're not, you're not going to be in pain forever, but what's forever? 20 years, like, or 40 years? What do you mean? Like, are we looking at 2 years here? So I do have an amazing, my close people close to me know I get the timeline. Ask McCall, she gets timelines. Like, I get, for myself, I get these timelines, a sense of like, okay, this is going to be happening for the next 2 or 4 years. I can deal with that. Like, or this is going to be a 6-month thing. I can deal with that. And it's not hard and fast, but it really helps me, because the human parts of us really need to know, like, yeah, there's an end to suffering. There's an end to this cycle, but my whole life, or like a decade, like, so we need those little comforts of and glimpses of coming out of it. So those would be the things that I would say help me the most with the darkness and working with it.
Beautiful. Those are so helpful and very, very congruent with so much of my own discoveries, that I love this idea of, which has changed, even as I was preparing for this potential hurricane. Well, we're definitely going to get part of it, but it's like, it's dark outside right now. Like I would not be so dark on this video, because usually I have like some really great natural lighting, but it is dark outside in the middle of the day here in the Gulf Coast of Florida. And, I've gone through 3 of these previously, and I was noticing as I was preparing, everything you just mentioned. The first one was that, to know that nothing lasts forever. The Buddhist idea of impermanence, and everything is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is to even when we might be suffering, or in a period of, or part of our life is dark, or full of struggle or challenge, to not paint our entire life
Yes.
with that darkness. And I do think that's something that comes with maturity in the soul work, and seeing ourselves as multifaceted. So if one facet of the diamond of ourself is, cloudy or dark, or, I can't remember what a gemologist says about flawed, or feels flawed, that not all of the facets. In fact, I think that's another really wonderful thing about becoming it. It's not becoming, because we naturally are, but honoring our multifaceted nature, which our culture doesn't teach us, right? We have this illusion of self-same identity, which I think is one of the most soulless kinds of things, and gets in the way of the discovery of the soul, to see how multifaceted we are. So I love that. And then the time frames, I love that. I'm the same way. I mean, I can see so much, even though people don't want to hear it, but when I can say, well, last few times I've seen folks go through something, or when I've been through something like this, it's a 2-year process. I mean, at least,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
this is like probably a 7-year deal, or,
Yeah, exactly.
and I don't know, I get the same kind of thing. And I love to dabble in astrology, and just the time frames with astrology are wonderful, because when you're looking on the frames of 7 or 21 or 42, or even 30-year cycles of the return of Saturn, in our charts, just the power of honoring something. We even talked to, in our email exchange, about when I talked about, I've been so fortunate with my music, and everybody says, how lucky, and only so many people would ever get to that, or it seemed like you were just like an overnight success. And it's like, most overnight successes take about 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I think these time frames are great, because we can also then settle into enjoying the journey. I remember my teacher, my native teacher, would say, Michael, all the life is on its way up, on your way up the mountain. At the top of it, we don't tend to go up there much, because there's nothing up there, beyond the tree line. It's like, sure, you can check out the view, but all life is growing and rich along the journey up the mountain. And if you're just focused on getting to the top, you're going to miss life, right? And I feel that in your work and in your sharing, and I think that's part of the power of really. And I love that you tapped into alchemy so deeply. And by the way, for anybody who might be interested in alchemy, I find it one of the nicest, simplest, not the right word, simplified without losing the complexity and richness, because you really honor the richness and complexity of the alchemical process. I've been into it from my Jungian studies, but even Jung was kind of always not always as clear, and it can be a very, has all different kinds of aspects to it. But I really love that you make it understandable for the reader in a really clear way, and to see. And this is something I definitely wanted to get to in our share of the Soulversation, that I can't remember the last part of the alchemical process you describe. I can pull it up here. You can,
Is it distillation?
yeah, I think it's, oh, I was actually, um, combination of distillation and the coagulation and radiation.
Radiation. Oh,
Um,
radiation. Oh my goodness. That's a whole topic.
It is. But before we get into radiation, I want to talk about emptiness. I want to talk
Mm.
about, you know, um, as you were talking about the inevitability of the suffering and knowing how it grows us, part of my mission in Musitations is the idea of us, being music. Part of my understanding of that is, the Cherokee call this beautiful instrument the long human being,
Mm.
because they say we have to be hollowed out by life so creator can play us, and life can play us, the universe can play us, and that every little nick and piece of suffering is an opening, and that we end up becoming hollowed out or emptied so life or creator can play us. And actually in the Creek, the native tribe close to here that I'm an honorary member of, call creator the master of the breath,
Mm.
which I really love. So I'm curious from an alchemical perspective how, because I love when you talked about emptiness. It's kind of like, as we discover the soul, and understanding that the soul for me is less a thing, right, than it's always, we can't, whatever we say about it, it's not it. It's always going to be beyond, right? I mean, it's dangerous to ever try to,
Yeah,
because
it is.
it's part of our, for me, and I would love your sharing on it too, that it is our part of the great mystery, and it's our part of how we connect to the great mystery. It's the part of us that knows the mystery. It's the part of us that knows creator, and also probably the part of us that is animated by, through, and for creator, or whatever word works for folks. But I guess I would be really, I'm just interested. I was really touched. It was like, oh, this is totally soul sister. She so gets, until someone really can honor and touch the emptiness. And in Everflowing, I call it the abyss. And to see that often to me is also the other side of awakening that I just don't hear much about. And from your first quote to the book to, um, why we're here today, I would love to hear alchemy, emptiness, and how you understand living and inhabiting, or how emptiness is connected to this whole process in either personally or alchemically.
Yeah, that's good. The first thing that comes to mind is I talk about in the book and the later stages of the journey that we can't just understand nothing or the emptiness. I use the word nothing. We actually have to become it. We become nothing, which is an excruciating process for the ego. It is so hard because we have to give up all identities, including spiritual identities, including enlightenment. It's like all stories of enlightenment, you only find it when you give up finding it. When you finally realize, I'm never going to find it, I don't know what it is, that's when you find it. So alchemically, the distillation strips us of every single identity. By the end of this process, you are nothing. And that's a good thing.
Yes.
I
Yes.
actually have a song that I wrote called Nothing at All, and I can't wait to share it on my podcast, because that's when I realized, like, oh, this is the point, to become nothing, that I'm so hollowed out, so unattached to any labels. For me, the good labels, the spiritual labels, were the ones that had to fall, like being the musician and being the healer and being the alchemist. Like, I had ideas of what that meant, and it all had to go until I truly was nothing. And that's when you melt into the mystery, right? That's when you just melt into the flow. And radiation, you think radiation is what comes after becoming nothing, because you almost feel nothing for a while, because your ego isn't attached to all those old ways of seeing yourself or being. And so it really feels like nothingness. It's kind of disconcerting at first, like, maybe I should be feeling more, maybe I should be more excited about this, but you're not, because you're so surrendered. It's like the deepest surrender you can get to, and you have to stay there for a while. You have to stay there for a while to start hearing the music. And it's like you talk about in your book, tuning into the river. What is that river bringing and flowing through you? What wants to be born through you? You have to be so out of the way, so out of the way. We're still in our way so much, which when we take the second half of the mountain journey, which is why we have to take it, because we don't even know how much we're in our way. And the nothingness, the emptiness, gets us out of our way so we can be played. And I love the mystics. A lot of times in Rumi's poetry, he talks about the reed being pulled from the reed bed, and it becomes the flute, that the breath of God. And the only thing the reed wants is to be the flute for the breath of God. Like, and the longing and everything comes through that. Really hard for the human, really hard for the ego to let that happen and to get out of the way. But oh, that's the music. That's becoming the music. And I love how you said that. That's actually one of the first podcasts of yours that I watched, was Being the Music. We are the music. And which really resonated for me, because early on in my journey, I got the message, you have to become music, because all I ever wanted to do was music. It's the only thing I wanted to do. And I was trying so hard to do it. And I was trying so hard to be a music, like a singer songwriter. And I was trying so hard to learn how to songwrite and get it all right. And it all slowly just fell away from me, and I had a huge period of silence where I didn't write music at all. And the message from Spirit was, because you are becoming music, you have to become music, which I understood intellectually, I think, but I didn't really know what that felt like until I did. So it's a process.
Mm. Mm. Oh, you were just the music just then. I always say the depth of the meditation or the song you can always know by the depths of silence that follows it. And thank you for that. Thank you for all of that. And because I just feel that is our challenge. And as Westerners, we have this real, we've been an experiment of individuality, on the planet. And it's this interesting paradox. I just love everything you just said, and I just, my most profound way of honoring it is silence. So, complete agreement, and that would be a subject of another Musitations, but my own journey of becoming music versus playing music, and I see you on that journey, and your sharing was music. That was music just then, and this idea of how we begin to. I love the image of, we are each a snowflake, or if we're a droplet of water, or a molecule of water, that during this incarnation, it's like we become the snowflake, and nature never makes a copy, only creates originals, a billion snowflakes, and every single one is going to be individual, unique, one of a kind. And yet we also are connected in one, in this idea of unity and diversity that we're struggling with, because the East has had the answer of, sense of self very connected to family or community, or, kind of that. And we've gone in this opposite direction of creating such an individual ego, such a center of gravity of individuality, which it has a truth to it, because I think the soul is deeply individual and unique. And yet the soul is not the ego, as you rightly pointed out, and how we move from ego to soul. And because we don't have soul initiations that can help move the ego out of the center of gravity of the self, the soul can become the center of gravity of the self, is this great challenge, for us. And that's why I really, I see you as, a soul initiated, adult, and we don't have many soul initiated adults in our culture, and particularly at your age, that I feel this is so important, because we need to begin to have rites of passage again, or soul initiations, in a way that does not dissolve and eradicate individuality, which religion can do. And that's the problem. And religions actually aren't initiating souls. They're giving an opportunity to know that there is a greater reality, but it's become so embedded in, cultural conditioning, which I could say the same thing about psychology. One of the reasons I'm retired from work as a psychologist is it's too culturally embedded. It's not radical enough for real soul change and soul unfolding. But this sense of, because no two flutes are alike, right? So even though we become empty, we become more ourselves. And I think that's also, and I've been a student of all paths, but particularly Buddhism for my Zen Buddhist teacher, 40 years. We just sat together and we'll sit for hours, and he has been such a blessing in my life. And at the same time, the idea of no self, which is a big part of Buddhism, has been hugely freeing for me. What I got from what you said, which I loved, and I saw it in your energy and your smile and your light you carry, which I want to really honor, that there is something about the more darkness we move through, the more brilliant our light, and that the way carbon becomes a diamond is through tremendous darkness and pressure. But that this sense of, sometimes Buddha nature, he and I get in arguments because, as a real Zen Buddhist, he'll say, well, the soul is just another version of the self, and that's an illusion. And, it's like, but the Buddha nature, it's like the snowflake's Buddha nature is individually unique, and he'll give me that. So, oh well, of course, it's like the acorn theory of the soul, that no matter where you plant that acorn, it's going to become its inner instructions, its inner calling is to become an oak tree, no matter where you plant that on the
Mm,
planet. And it will, depending on the soil, depending on the weather, it will look individual and unique to itself. But by trying not to be something else, and that's what's so challenging as human beings, is we are the one being on the planet that can betray its own truth. That we can be an oak tree but try to be an apple tree. And I think that this is what I love in your work, is that your struggle to become yourself, you had to let go of thinking that you were anything that anybody has ever told you you were, and you had to just follow what I like to call the truth that your blood whispered to you, the
mm,
deepest core of
mm.
yourself, and which to me is the acorn listening to itself to become the oak tree. And to ask, what kind of fruit did I come here to bear? And ask it so innocently, Pablo Neruda has a line in his poem, called Poetry, where he wrote about his discovering poetry. And he says, I wrote the first bare line, pure foolishness, pure wisdom. And to me, I have that. I can feel that, the tangible sense of your own awakening to your own originality. And I think that's what's really, really beautiful, and what people miss. And the good news out there is, by becoming empty, by becoming nothing, is the best way to become who you truly were designed to be. So that to me is really powerful. Just so honored to have you here, have an opportunity to get to be with you a bit more, to get to know you and your path and your journey and your own originality a bit more. I can't wait to hear that song about being nothing. Um, I'm not sure. Nobody. Was it Nobody? How did you call it?
Nothing,
Nothing.
nothing at all.
Yeah, I so can't wait to hear that. So please let us know when that becomes available on your podcast. But I just want to give you an opportunity to, um, before we finish up, I want for you to share a little bit about how people can connect with you, work with you. But I'd also love to, if there was anything before going there that you would want to say or share before we kind of bring this Soulversation in for a landing.
I I feel pretty completed with what we talked about. That was a lot of stuff. It was really nice. The best way to find my work is my website, mccallerickson.com. You can find my podcast there, my book. I also interact on Twitter and Instagram, McCall Erickson. So those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Wonderful. Well, I just can't thank you enough for making the time to share, and I look forward to many more Soulversations with you, whether it's online or not. And I really want to encourage folks to check out your book once again, The Second Half of the Mountain, A
Mm.
Guide to Personal Alchemy After Awakening. I really highly recommend it. And I also have had a chance to listen to some of your music, McCall, and it's just beautiful. You have a very soulful voice and message in your music, and I hope to be hearing a whole lot more as you allow yourself more and more to become music. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
And for the listeners and audience out there, thanks for tuning in. It's always great to have you here, and sending everyone, real blessings, and a sense of a prayer for resilience, stay safe, stay in the moment. And if you can really remember, each moment is a note in the song of today. And that means that no matter where you are and who you're with or what's happening, that find how that can bring you into a place of flow, like music, like love, like water. God bless you, be well, and we'll see you on the next Musitations. You've been listening to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need, where we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the soul. I've been your guide and host, Michael Brant DeMaria. Feel free to check out my music on Pandora, Amazon Music, Spotify, XM Sirius Radio, or Soundscapes Cable. You can also check out my website at michaeldemaria.com or online programs at alldaypeace.com, alldaypeace.com. Listen to your heart, follow your soul, and we'll see you on the next episode of Musitations.